The first snow of November came silent and sure, blanketing the valley in white before dawn. Along the ridge, a lone rider reined in his horse and watched the thin column of smoke rising from the half-built cabin below. Jacob Hale had been passing this way for nearly 3 weeks, though he never admitted to himself why. Maybe it was the way that woman worked steady as the turning of seasons, or maybe it was the ache in his chest every time he saw her. Shoulders bent under the weight of a log she had no business lifting alone. Her name, the townsfolk said, was Emma Rourke, widow of a ranch hand who died in a stampede the spring before. Since then, she had sold what little was left, bought a stretch of wild land by Willow Bend, and begun building a home. No one offered help. No one believed she would last the winter. Jacob told himself he didn't care one way or another, but still he rode by. Always early before the frost melted, before his foreman noticed his absence. He watched her notch the next timber, swing the mallet with short efficient strikes. Her movements were all grit and habit, no wasted energy. The smoke from her small fire curled upward through the brittle air. Somewhere deep in Jacob's memory, another image flickered: his wife Clara, standing in the doorway of a house they never finished. The fever took her before the roof was on. Since then, the sight of any half-built home made his stomach twist. Emma straightened, brushing snow from her sleeves. From that distance, Jacob could see her face clearly for the first time. Younger than he'd thought, but carved by hard, living, her eyes sharp with determination. She looked toward the ridge suddenly, as if she'd felt his gaze. Their eyes met across the open ground, a flash of connection that startled him. He turned his horse away, the crunch of hooves muffled by snow. At the base of the ridge, he stopped. The wind carried the faint sound of her hammer striking wood. There was something in that rhythm that stayed with him even after he rode home. His ranch waited cattle-penned hands, ready for orders, but the world felt distant, half-muted. In the quiet after supper, Jacob sat by the fire and realized he hadn't spoken a full sentence to anyone in days. The thought should have comforted him. Instead, it made him restless. The next morning, he saddled his horse before sunrise and took the same path. Habit now, though, he told himself it was just a ride to check the weather. From the ridge, he saw the cabin taking shape, walls closed in roof frame rising. She was winning her private war against the cold. He almost smiled, then caught himself. People like him didn't smile for no reason. A storm gathered by afternoon wind sweeping down from the mountains with the smell of iron and snow. Jacob turned his horse toward home, but at the edge of the timberline he hesitated. Below, Emma worked against the wind, trying to fasten a canvas tarp over the roof. The gusts tore at it mercilessly. She climbed the beam again and again, hammering nails with hands gone numb. Jacob cursed under his breath. No sense in getting involved, he told himself. She'd shoot him on sight for pity. But when the first flakes hit his coat, something broke loose inside him, the same thing that had cracked the day Clara died, only in reverse. He wheeled his horse downhill. By the time he reached the cabin, the snow was falling thick. Emma saw him coming and grabbed the rifle from beside the doorframe. "Don't need charity," she shouted over the wind. "Not charity," Jacob called back. "Common sense. Storm will take your roof before nightfall." She eyed him, measuring his tone. "And what's your price, neighbor?" Jacob swung off the saddle, pulled a coil of rope and heavy canvas from his pack horse. No price. Just hands that remember the work. For a moment she didn't move. Then she lowered the rifle halfway. "Do what you came to do then." They worked without speaking. He tied ropes while she hammered nails, both moving fast as the wind howled around them. Snow gathered on their coats and in their hair. Once, when the tarp slipped, Jacob steadied it with one arm and felt her gloved hand brush his wrist. Neither looked up. When the last corner was secured, he stepped back. The cabin creaked but held. He adjusted his hat and turned toward his horse. "Wait," she said. He stopped. "Who are you?" "Jacob Hale." She nodded once. "Thank you." He tipped his hat, mounted, and disappeared into the storm. That night, Jacob lay awake, listening to the wind batter his windows. He pictured her alone in that half-finished home, the small fire, the flickering light against unsealed walls. Something in him wanted to know if she'd made it through. He told himself he wouldn't ride out again. He knew he was lying. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world was buried and still. Jacob saddled his horse anyway. As he rode toward Willow Bend, the sun broke through the clouds, turning the snow to silver. He didn't know what he would say when he saw her. Maybe nothing. Maybe just to see that the cabin was still standing, that the woman who refused to break had survived another night in the wild. He didn't yet understand why it mattered, but he would. The morning after the storm, the valley shone like a sheet of hammered silver. Sun pulled steam off the drifts where the creek ran, and every branch wore a crust of light. Jacob rode in that hush, the kind that makes a man feel like a trespasser in a holy place. When he reached the willow bend, he slowed, scanning for damage. The cabin stood there stubborn and square under its canvas skin, smoke rising from a stovepipe that had no right to be working yet, but was anyway. A figure stepped out into the snow with a bucket bundled to the chin. Emma saw him at the fence line and lifted a hand in a greeting that was not quite welcome and not quite warning. He dismounted without words. She set the bucket down and met him halfway, boots crunching through a crust of ice. Close up, he saw the tired under her eyes, the red windburn along her cheekbones, the small cut on one knuckle that had frozen and reopened, and frozen again. She saw the same in him, the sleepless night, the lines that grief draws when it has time to take its measure. "You came back," she said. "Thought I should make sure the roof is still your roof," he said. The humor was so dry it almost cracked. She let out one breath that might have been a laugh if it had more warmth. "It held," she said, "thanks to your knots." They fell into work like they had practiced it for years. He checked the lashings and the rafter pitch under the snow load. She shoveled a path to the woodpile, then split lengths clean and even. When the sun climbed higher, wind set in from the north and the cold bit sharper. He cut cross braces from a fallen pine and nailed them into the corner frame. The hammering echoed against the hills. She brought him a tin cup with coffee that tasted like char and determination. He took it with a nod and drank until his fingers thawed around the metal. "You got any help coming?" he asked after a while. "No," she said. The single word made no complaint, like a fact you could weigh and stack. "Town should have offered," he said. Town offered opinion, she said, and he heard the steel in that. He knew it too. Small towns collect judgments like burrs, and once they stick, they are hard to pull free. He told himself to ride home before he put his name beside hers in their mouths. He stayed. The wind sharpened again, and they worked shoulder to shoulder on the leeward side, fitting a stubborn log into place. Their hands touched once around the weight of it, a brief press through gloves that may as well have been skin for how keenly both noticed. Neither looked up. By noon, the sky began to clear. They set a new ridge board and stepped back together to see the line of it. It looked true. Jacob felt a small lift in his chest, the body memory of satisfaction that comes when a thing that should have been crooked sits straight. He had not felt that in a long time. Emma must have sensed something change in him, because she asked in a voice lighter than before, "You build much in your life?" "Jacob Hale." "Enough to know I miss it," he said. Then before he could stop the words, he added, "Used to have a house frame started on my side of the valley. Never finished it." He waited for the pity that he could not stand. She only nodded as if the sentence was a line in a ledger that balanced with others she knew too well. "Not every roof gets to live long enough for stories," she said. "But walls still want to stand. We give them that much." They worked until the light softened and the air turned blue. When he went to leave, she said his name, and he turned surprised to find he liked the sound of it from her mouth. "I will go to church on Sunday," she said as if warning him. "I need to buy nails and flour in town, and I will not crawl in through the back door to do it." "No one should have to," he said. "That is not the same as they will not make me pay for it," she said. He nodded. "I will be there," he said, and the words came out before he weighed them. She studied his face, looking for the reason. Maybe she found it. Maybe not. She gave one quick nod and went inside with the last armload of split wood. Sunday came with a glitter of frost that made the church steps squeal under boots. Jacob took his usual seat near the back and felt the old weight of eyes leave him alone, because a man who keeps to himself becomes part of the furniture after a while. The Reverend took his place behind the lectern and began with the reading words about righteousness and mercy that sounded thinner than the air. Emma arrived late. The door opened, cold rushed in, and with it, the hush that rides any new thing into a room. She walked down the center aisle steady and unhurried, set her jaw against the whisper burn that followed, and sat in the front pew, because that was the only space left. Jacob watched the line of her back and felt a heat rise in him that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with anger, at a town that could pretend to honor courage with hymns, but fail to see it standing 10 feet away. Clara Whitfield in her lace and iron leaned toward the next pew and let out a sentence just loud enough to be measured by every ear. Some women forget their place when there is no man to keep it for them. The words fell like a neat little knife. Jacob looked at the floorboards and counted nails until the urge to answer passed. The reverend droned on and the prayer drifted over the heads of people who were thinking about the stew on their stoves and the gossip they would eat with it. When dismissal came, the aisle narrowed with bodies that were not in any hurry to make way. Jacob forced his feet to move one step then another out into the pale winter sun. Emma stood on the packed snow near the steps with a paper parcel of nails under her arm. She kept her head up, but her eyes were tired. Jacob could have tipped his hat from a distance and gone home clean. He could have. He did not. He crossed that yard, felt the needles of 60 glances, and stopped within arm's length of her. "Miss Rourke," he said. She looked at him steady. "Mr. Hale," she said. The air between them was a thin wire. "Storm did not take your roof," he said. "No," she said. "I am grateful for that." Her tone was plain and careful, like walking a plank. A hush fell in a way that was not natural. Clara's voice slid into it. "Strange company you keep these days, Jacob. Such a helpful man." Her smile had no heat. Jacob let silence fill him. He tasted fear the way a horse does before a thunderclap. "Say it," he told himself. "Say anything that names the truth and let the pieces land where they want." But grief had taught him the trick of stillness, and for too long he had mistaken it for virtue. He touched the brim of his hat and said nothing at all. The wire between him and Emma hummed, once then went dead. She stepped away first. It was a small thing, a pivot of a boot heel, a shift of a paper package from one arm to the other. But Jacob felt the hinge of it swing wide. She threaded through the crowd without bumping anyone and headed for her horse. He watched her mount and ride toward the road, the parcel balanced in front of her on the saddle. The sound of hooves on snow faded. Conversation flowed back into the space she left. Moses, Jacob's foreman, came up beside him quiet. "That was a chance to be a man again, boss," he said in a voice meant only for Jacob. Jacob kept his gaze on the horizon until the line of pine blurred. When he finally looked at Moses, the old man did not blink. "You riding home or riding right?" Moses asked. Jacob did not answer. He went home and cut wood until his hands buzzed and the ache in his shoulders dulled the ache in his chest. By dusk he was so tired he could barely lift the axe. He stood in the yard with his breath fogging the air and felt the house behind him like a shell that kept the weather out and nothing else. He went inside and sat by the fire without lighting a lamp. The room dimmed to embers and then to ash. Sometime in the dark he rose, saddled the horse, and rode to the ridge above Willowben, out of habit more than hope. The cabin below was a square of faint lantern light. He watched it until the cold chased him home again, and in that long blue hour between night and morning he admitted to himself that the silence he had worn like armor had turned against him. It had kept out the worst of pain, and it had kept out everything else too. Dawn found him at his table with paper and a stub of pencil he had not used in years. He began a list without knowing why. Nails, rope, hogshead of flour at cost, spare hinges, iron stovepipe length, good hands willing for a day, and a name he wrote last, as if saving the hardest line for the end. "Speak for her when it matters." He folded the paper, slid it into his coat, and stood. Outside, the snow squeaked under his boots. He felt the thin edge of a decision settle in his bones, not yet a promise, but close. The morning was still gray when Jacob rode into town. A fog hung low over the river, turning everything to soft outlines, as if the world wasn't sure it wanted to be seen. His horse's hooves made hollow sounds on the frozen road, and in that emptiness he rehearsed what he might say. He had a dozen versions ready, all thin, all weak. What he needed was not words, but courage, the kind that burns without showing flame. Moses was already at the stables when Jacob arrived. The old man leaned against a post, chewing a straw and pretending to mind the tack. "You heading for the council, boss?" he asked. Jacob nodded. "Then do what your wife would have wanted," Moses said. "She'd have liked that woman. Strong ones always know their kind." Jacob didn't answer, only adjusted his hat and went on. In the saloon, the town council had gathered like vultures circling an easy meal. Papers covered the table, and Vernon Nash stood near them, smug and polished, with the air of a man who had already won. Clara Whitfield sat primly at his side, a smile that never reached her eyes. When Jacob stepped through the door, the noise dimmed. He could feel every stare like a shove. Mr. Hale, Clara said sweetly. We're discussing the matter of Emma Rourke's property. Unfortunate situation, really. Jacob glanced at the papers. Unfortunate's one word, he said. Fraud is another. He threw a folded envelope onto the table. Those are the receipts for Ben Rourke's debts, paid in full the month before he died. Nash knew that. Vernon's smile faltered. You calling me a liar? If the word fits, Jacob said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. You're trying to steal a widow's land because you think no one will stand up for her. I'm standing. A murmur went through the crowd. Clara's hand twitched just enough to betray irritation. This is hardly proper, she said. The woman's reputation is earned, Jacob cut in. Earned by working in weather that would break most men, while this town whispered behind her back. She's braver than any of you and more honest than the lot of us put together. For a moment, no one moved. The stove crackled in the corner, loud as gunfire. Then Moses stepped forward from the doorway, hat in hand. He's right, the old man said. You all saw her build that place with her own hands. I'll help her finish it. Me too, said the blacksmith. Another voice followed, then another. Small at first, then stronger. The room shifted like a herd turning direction. Clara's smile finally cracked. Vernon muttered something and gathered his papers, but his confidence was gone. Jacob met their eyes one by one, then said, We start at dawn. He left before anyone could stop him. By sunrise 12, men rode out of town behind him carrying hammers, axes, and bundles of timber. Frost bit at their beards and the sound of their horses echoed through the valley like drums. When they reached the cabin, Emma was outside splitting wood, her breath visible in the air. She froze when she saw them, one hand still on the axe. Jacob dismounted, first walked toward her and stopped a few feet away. I was a coward, he said. You deserve better. I'm here now. We all are. Her eyes darted from him to the men behind him, then back. She searched his face for mockery, for pity, found neither. What she saw instead was exhaustion laced with sincerity, the kind that only comes when a man has wrestled his ghosts and come up gasping, but still standing. You mean to help me, she asked, if you'll let us. The air between them stretched thin. Then she gave one small nod. Then pick up a hammer. Work began like a song without words. Hammers struck in rhythm saws, rasped boots thudded on frozen ground. Laughter came slow but real, rising with the warmth of effort. They lifted beams, sealed gaps, laid the roof boards straight and true. Moses cooked beans over an open fire. The blacksmith fixed hinges. Jacob worked beside Emma, saying little, but their movements matched like two halves of a pattern. By the second day, walls stood solid. On the third, the roof was done, smoke curling from the chimney that Moses had set right with his bare hands. People from town came to watch, some offering food, others just silent curiosity. A few whispered, but no one dared speak loud. What they saw was proof of something they'd forgotten: community without judgment. The last nail went in at sunset. Emma stood back, arms crossed, staring up at the finished cabin. Her eyes were wet, though no tears fell. Jacob wiped sweat from his brow and looked at her, wanting to say 100 things and knowing none would fit. Hooves sounded behind them. Vernon Nash rode up with 4 hired men dusting snow from his coat. He wore arrogance like armor. This land's under dispute, he announced. You're all trespassing. Men dropped their tools, tension humming through the air. Jacob stepped forward. The only trespasser here is you. Vernon's hand hovered near his gun. The silence grew heavy enough to crack. Then Emma walked forward, shoulders straight, a folded paper in her hand. She faced Vernon squarely. This is my deed, she said. Signed, sealed, witnessed. I've met the claim requirements. You're standing on my property. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then the sheriff rode out from behind the trees. She's right, he said. Council reviewed your claim last night, Nash. Denied. You've got no business here. Vernon's face went pale. He looked around and saw only set jaws and steady eyes. He muttered a curse and turned his horse. This isn't over, he spat. Yes, Jacob said quietly. It is. The sound of hooves faded into the hills. Dusk settled soft and clean over the valley. One by one, the men packed up, offering quiet goodbyes. Moses clapped Jacob on the shoulder before leaving. You did right this time, boss, he said. When the last rider disappeared, only Jacob and Emma remained. Lantern lights spilled through the cabin door, painting gold across the snow. Jacob looked at the home they'd built together. Every beam a small redemption. I don't know how to do this, he said, still scared. So am I, she answered. We build it the same way we built the walls, one day at a time. He took her hand. She didn't pull away. They stood there in the doorway while the night came down around them quiet except for the wind sighing through the pines. For the first time in years, Jacob didn't feel alone. The stars came out above the ridge sharp and endless. Inside the fire caught and burned steady. Outside the land lay sleeping under the promise of spring. Spring came early that year. The thaw loosened the creek until it ran quick and clear, and the valley stripped bare. All winter began to remember color. Willows showed green tips, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and pine sap. At Willow Bend, the cabin stood strong against the slow melt, its roof glinting in the morning light, smoke curling steady from the chimney. Inside, Jacob woke to that smell of smoke and coffee, the kind that means a home is breathing. Emma was already outside feeding the hens she'd bartered from Moses 2 weeks before. Jacob watched her through the doorway for a while, the rhythm of her movements unhurried sure. There was a peace in her now that hadn't been there before the sharpness in her shoulders softened by belonging. He stepped out onto the porch, boots thudding against the planks they'd sanded smooth together. You're up late, she said without turning. The rooster did his job, he said. I just ignored it longer than usual. She smiled over her shoulder, small and quiet. You used to be up before dawn. I used to have reasons not to sleep, he said. The light caught her face just then, and he saw something like warmth cross it, quick as a shadow but real. And now she asked. Now I think I'm learning how, he said. They ate breakfast together, the easy silence of two people who no longer needed to fill space with words. After Jacob saddled his horse to check the fences around the lower pasture, Emma packed bread and jerky in a small sack, handed it to him without asking if he needed it. He took it, brushed her fingers by accident, or maybe on purpose. The days unfolded like that, simple, steady. They built a corral beside the cabin, then a shed for feed. Jacob taught her how to read the slope of land where runoff would cut through come heavy rain. She taught him how to tend a garden, to plant beans and potatoes in rows that would last through summer. Their work fit together the way music fits around silence. One evening near dusk, Moses came riding up the path with 2 ranch hands, trailing behind each carrying a basket of food. Supper, he called. And maybe a little company if you'll have it. Emma laughed, genuine and full. Always, she said, taking the baskets. Come in before the stew cools. They gathered around the table, rough pine, uneven but sturdy. Moses told stories from the old trail drives, the kind that ended in laughter even when they began in hardship. Jacob watched the flicker of firelight on Emma's face, the way she listened, eyes bright. When she looked at him, something unspoken passed between them, gratitude maybe, or something deeper that neither dared name yet. After the others left, he lingered on the porch while she washed the dishes inside. The stars were coming out slow and deliberate. He felt the weight of contentment, unfamiliar but welcome. When she joined him wiping her hands on a cloth, he said, Been a long while since this porch felt like home. Maybe because it didn't exist before, she said gently. You built it with your own hands, Jacob. Sometimes we just don't see what we've made until someone else stands beside it. He nodded, thinking of Clara, of the years that had hollowed him out. I didn't think I'd ever build again, he said quietly. You did, she answered. You just needed a reason. They stood together until the lantern inside burned low. Somewhere in the dark, an owl called, and the world felt whole in a way that startled him. The weeks turned into months. By late April, wildflowers carpeted the fields behind the cabin. Emma spent her mornings tending the small garden, humming under her breath, and Jacob found himself pausing his work just to listen. Sometimes he helped her, kneeling in the dirt to pull weeds, their hands brushing as they worked side by side. One afternoon, a wagon appeared on the horizon. It was Clara Whitfield, flanked by 2 men sitting tall with her chin lifted like a queen surveying her realm. Jacob saw her coming and felt his stomach knot, but he didn't move from where he stood. Emma wiped her hands on her apron, her jaw set. Mrs. Whitfield, Jacob greeted evenly as she stopped her team. Mr. Hale, she said. Miss Rourke. Her gaze swept over the cabin, the corral, the garden, the small signs of a shared life. Seems you've made yourselves quite comfortable. We've made a home, Emma said, voice calm. Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. A home built on scandal can't stand long. You should both remember that. Jacob's tone stayed steady, but the words cut clean. We remember plenty, ma'am. Mostly how folks can choose between cruelty and decency every day. You're welcome to stay for coffee, but we've work to do. The matriarch's mouth tightened, and for a heartbeat she looked like she might strike him with words sharper than knives. But she didn't. She pulled the reins instead, turned her horse, and rode off without another sound. Emma exhaled slowly. You didn't have to say that, she said, though there was no reproach in her voice. I did, he said. Some ghosts don't leave until you name them. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Then maybe you finally buried yours. Spring deepened. The snow on the ridge melted, feeding the river until it ran bright and full. The cabin's walls held the smell of pine and smoke and bread. Jacob sometimes caught himself humming when he worked an old tune he thought he'd forgotten. One morning as dawn spread gold across the hills, he found Emma standing at the doorway. Coffee cup in her hands, her hair loose around her shoulders. He joined her, the silence easy as breathing. You ever think about what's next, he asked softly. Every day, she said. But I don't plan much farther than tomorrow. Tomorrow's enough. He nodded. Maybe that's how we build, one tomorrow at a time. She smiled at that, turned to face him fully. Then let's keep building. He reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and for the first time since the blizzard months ago, kissed her without fear or hesitation. Outside, the world was green again, alive and new. Inside, the warmth of that kiss lingered like sunlight through the window. And for Jacob Hale, the man who had once only watched life from a distance, it felt like the first true spring of his life. Summer crept into the valley slow and certain. By June, the hills behind Willow Bend turned gold, and the air carried the hum of bees instead of the moan of wind. Jacob and Emma worked through the long days mending fences, tending the small herd they'd started together, cutting hay for winter. Life had taken on a rhythm that felt honest, a rhythm made of effort and quiet satisfaction. Each morning began the same coffee before dawn, the smell of wood smoke and earth, the sound of horses shifting in the corral. Sometimes they talked about chores, sometimes about nothing at all. Words mattered less than the comfort of being near. When the sun climbed high, they'd rest in the shade by the creek, boots off the world stilled, except for the rush of water over stone. Jacob had never thought peace could be this simple. After years of fighting ghosts, he had run out of reasons to run. Emma filled the spaces that silence used to own. She didn't ask him to forget, only to live, and he had. One evening, after a long day cutting hay, they sat on the porch watching the light fade from the sky. Crickets had started their song, and the air smelled faintly of lilac from the bush Emma had planted by the steps. Jacob leaned back in his chair, a half-smile playing at his mouth. Moses says he's coming by Sunday, he said. Wants to bring the hands for supper. Good, Emma replied. He's been threatening to steal my biscuit recipe for weeks. You'd let him if he asked. I would, she said, smiling. Some things aren't worth guarding? Jacob nodded slowly. Maybe that's true for hearts, too. She glanced at him but said nothing. The silence between them was warm, full, the kind that didn't need mending. When Sunday came, the cabin filled with laughter. Moses brought stories and a bottle of whiskey that burned clean. The ranch hands brought music, a battered fiddle, a harmonica. They played until the stars spilled across the sky. Jacob caught himself laughing, really laughing for the first time in years. When he looked across the table, Emma's eyes were bright in the lamplight. She looked at him, and the world felt small in the best possible way. After everyone left, the quiet settled back over the valley. Jacob stepped outside. Emma joined him, shawl around her shoulders. The moonlight painted the fields silver, the cabin glowing behind them like a lantern in the dark. You remember the night I found you in that storm, he asked. I remember thinking you were either foolish or kind, she said. Which did it turn out to be? Both, she said softly. He laughed low, and the sound wrapped around them like the wind. As summer turned to fall, they added a small room to the cabin, a future taking shape one board at a time. There were plans for more, a proper barn, maybe a few more head of cattle, a garden that could feed more than just them. They worked late into the evenings, the air cooling fast once the sun dropped. One night while they stood together fitting a beam into place, Emma said quietly, It's strange, isn't it? How life keeps asking us to start again. Maybe it's the only thing it knows how to ask, Jacob said. Build again. Trust again. She nodded and love again. He looked at her, then really looked and felt that familiar ache, the one that used to mean grief but now meant gratitude. You've given me back more than you know, he said. You gave yourself back, she replied. I just reminded you where to look. That night they sat by the fire after supper. The logs cracked and settled the flames, painting gold on the walls. Emma leaned against his shoulder. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. Jacob reached for her hand, fingers rough from work, but gentle in touch. "You think we'll ever be done building?" he asked. "Not if we're lucky," she said. "The day we stop, that's when it ends." He nodded, letting the thought settle. The fire burned lower, but the warmth remained. By first frost, the cabin was complete again, stronger than before, each board telling the story of what it had taken to stand. The valley slept under a thin layer of snow. The world hushed. Jacob stepped outside one morning, breath clouding in the cold, and looked at what they had made: the cabin, the corral, the garden lying quiet beneath the frost. Emma came up beside him, her hand slipping into his. "Looks like home," he said. "That's because it is," she answered. They stood there together as the sun rose over the ridge light, breaking across the frozen fields. Behind them, smoke curled from the chimney, carrying the scent of fire and bread into the clean air. Ahead, the land stretched wide and waiting the future unmarked. He turned to her, kissed her once, soft and certain. "One day at a time," she whispered. "One log at a time," he said. The wind moved through the pines, the light climbed higher, and for the first time since either of them could remember, the world felt steady, whole alive. And in the quiet of that morning, the cabin stood as proof: two broken lives, rebuilt and bound together, holding fast against everything that had once tried to tear them down.